Yeah, so welcome everyone back. So for the fifth presenter we have, so it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our next speaker, who is a platinum partner, Mr. Iain Swaine, who is Director EMEA Global Advisory at Biocatch. Iain has spent 16 years specializing in cybercrime prevention, initially within the Royal Bank of Scotland, where he created their cyber intelligence unit before moving to run the technical aspect of cybercrime prevention. After a 6-year period of globally consulting with banks on their cybercrime prevention strategy, he moved to Biocatch to aid in strategic implementation of behavioral biometrics and to manage client relationships. He realized the opportunity to look behind the devices at the person or a bot interacting with application opened new mechanism to both prevent attacks and to give insights into advisory capabilities in ways that were not previously possible. Today, he shares his expert opinion on the evolution of behavior for fraud detection. Now, without further ado, let me with allow me to waste no more time and let's welcome this remarkable man, Mr. Ian. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed for the introduction. I do feel at times I get a bit embarrassed by what's said there. I'd like to run through this afternoon a bit about my experiences in how behaviour has developed over the last few years. I've been very lucky to be there really from the start where behaviour was first taken up, and it was the UK banks who first started to look at it. I tried to take these as an educational experience rather than just a product pitch. I'm very proud of what we do in Biocatch, having been here about 5.5 years. But I try and give a perspective of what goes on from having been within banks and consulted for them in the past. So without further ado, let's see if we can move to the next page on the slide. And here we go. So I always like to put things into perspective. Why are we looking at behaviour? What is behaviour in relation to it? Why has it come about? From my perspective, I've seen the attacks predominantly in the banking sector, but I've done other work in e-commerce, go from being a purely technical style attack back up to what I call the human attacks, the wetware. And I think that by looking at behaviour, we start looking behind the device. We're seeing what's going on. We should never lose sight of all the technical sides. So the things like the IPs, the actual device fingerprints, and that's required obviously for PSD2 and possession. Activity monitoring, that transaction piece, specific components around malware detection, quite often in the past signature based, but now behavior, as I will talk about later, can deliver as much there. A good behavioral biometrics platform should be looking at the behavior, should be going behind the device, but it should be giving you device behavior as well in a way that actually supersedes that of previous gen device vendors, which are really looking at the technical side of it. To my mind, we've always had a predator-prey relationship, and it shows that I studied biology as my degree on there. We've got to think about what we're moving as a bank or an e-commerce site or even a government with a prey, and the bad guys, they're the predators. They're going to attack, so they're going to try different MOs. They're going to find where our weak spots are, and what we've got to do is have a layered approach. We're not just going to be looking at one layer which is technical. We've got to build upon this, and I'll talk about how behavior has gone from being, well, let's just look at how we're doing it, into cognitively what's going on, what's the analysis that's further behind it. Rather than myself saying too much, I think this is the best thing from one of our banking customers. We've got a lot of banks globally, about 65 banks who are working with us because we've concentrated on the financial sector. We're now moving into different verticals, as I mentioned there, as the same attacks are migrating from the banks into e-commerce, government, media, telecoms on there. And as the bank said, that effectively behaviour is now providing a crucial role in strengthening the security systems on there. And it's about protecting the customers, and it's actually giving you a lower false positive, a better view as to what's going on behind the scenes, rather than just going, it's a bad device on a blacklist. Well, it may be a new device. We're not going to automatically say it's bad. we've actually got the fact that there's consistent behavior behind it, for instance. So when we look at behavior, again, unlike purely technical side, we're not looking at point analysis. We're looking at the behavior throughout the journey of the customer as they go through from pre-log on to login, post-log on, doing a transaction, even applying for a new account where we're looking at just population level. We're looking for the subtle changes. We're looking where it may be going along, genuine customer, and then there's a blip of a bad guy, back down to genuine. It avoids what we've seen in the past, where you're looking at, well, take a snapshot here, snapshot there. You know, with good behavior, you're looking at the data, you're collecting it, and you're sending it back every 2 or 3 seconds, where there's no gaps in what's going on. And when we start looking at this, I talked about this earlier, you know, behavioral biometrics is being done at various levels. I've been looking at this now 5.5, 6 years. I've seen how it's grown from, you know, what we were doing with 500 parameters, now 3,000 parameters spread across the web and the mobile. And even when we look at what's been mandated with people like the European Banking Association for PSD2, and they're saying for inherence, well, you only need what's there as shown as number one, the behavioral biometrics, that raw data, how you hold, how you swipe, you know, are you shaking, what's your interaction? Well, that was the 500 parameters we're doing. We then moved on to cognitive analysis, where we started going, well, how does each user go through? What's going through their head? Can we get insight into their capability, their understanding of the digital journey? How do they do things specifically? Almost, you know, what are they doing when they're faced with things like an input box? And we walk the banks and say, well, can we tailor some of the fields? So actually, instead of just a drop-down box, it'll be a combo box. So they could type in for an international payment. Genuine user or the normal user would actually click and scroll down on a mouse and go USD. A bad guy would tab into it, type USD, hit enter and go through. So it allows us with this cognitive analysis to work out the differences that's happening. We start thinking about the fact that some of this is short and long-term memory. We've got in there segmented typing. So actually, if you know something and you're applying for a new credit card, or you're applying for access to a government gateway, or you're applying for buy now, pay later, you're going to know your own details, your first name, your last name. That's not going to be segmented. That's long-term memory. Bad guy doesn't know that. He's going to look at your details to use it in an ID theft. And he's then going to go and type between 3 and 5 characters at a time, remembering them for 10, 15, 20 seconds. So we're going to see differences. What we found as we moved to much more complex problems, which I'll come along, that of the voice scams, where we have the bad guys literally ringing up customers and getting them to undertake the transactions. We needed further insights. So we started to realize that by combining weaker signals, things which you can't get a handle on their own, they've got to be combined, they've got to be integrated into a proper supervised machine learning model. We can see, well, someone's hesitating. Are they distracted? When they're distracted, are they doodling around? How familiar are they with the process? Does it look like they're being guided because someone's on the phone talking to them? It's going to change the way they interact. You know, it's not just about the timing of what's going on. It's about the subtle nuances. You know, you can do stuff server side where you're looking at timing, but your false positive to find fraud is going to be very high. You're going to be disrupting a lot of genuine customers. If you don't have a profile to map back to, it's going to show up again. And then, you know, the newest we've got on there is age analysis. Are you behaving like someone of your cohort? We know that actually for scams, over 60s have a much higher likelihood of being scammed. You know, falling for it, they're being targeted because of their age, because they've got money. But actually, we can look and we can get a year of birth, and we can then compare that back to how they're interacting, what's going on. Can we spot if it's really the right person behind the account there? So it's all of this where you combine it, and it's been a journey from that original, you know, what people have called behavioral biometrics, into all of these other levels of analysis, which gets deeper, and there's many more parameters behind them to actually get to stuff which is usable. So if I talk about account takeover, I'm now talking about something like digital banking, or actually increasingly in e-commerce, where you've got sites you come back to there, whether it will be Amazon, whether it will be somewhere where you buy your custom toys there, if you're into models or similar to that, or you go and buy your clothing from. It's all about making sure that you've got an experience which is tailored to yourself. So you've got a login, but actually as part of that, quite often cards can be stored, or in digital banking, of course, this is where your money is. That's what the bad guys are really after. So examples of some of the things we actually look to spot for account takeovers, to spot where that person coming in is not that genuine one. Now, in the past, in account takeover, when you look at genuine and criminal profiles, we would see the fact it would be a new IP range. Yeah, we still do that. We can go, oh, it may be a different device. And yeah, we've got full device profiling up there and beyond most of the people giving device fingerprinting. We've got multiple IDs there. But we're looking at what's going on behind the keyboard. We can look for automated stuff. We can look for robotic behavior. We can spot malware. We can spot how good someone is in interacting with the application they're using. Do they know the digital banking journey well enough? Is the remote access Trojan? What's the timing on this? How does that feed back into what we'd expect the competency of them? So giving a little bit of a visualization of this, these are just, someone's got a mobile, and how do you use it? And think about how you use it yourself. These are 5 potential users. And we can see here that actually, even when you swap device, you're going to be consistent. You're not identical, but you're consistent. That first one, we can see it's right-handed. It's dominated on the right-hand side of the screen. We've got the swipe patterns on there. If we look to the second one, again, they've gone between devices, maybe different sizes on there on that first one, but they're still doing pretty much the same. We then look at number 4. We've got a really different swipe pattern there. From the look of it, they're actually turning it around to landscape, and they're doing it that way some of the time. So we get a feeling of all of this. This is what we talk about when we build up the genuine patterns of behavior. We can also look at the devices. And on that first one, if you notice, we say Chrome mobile on generic smartphone, Android 6. That could well actually be an emulated one from behavior. We may find that some of the things have changed on there. Again, we're not relying on just what the device tells us. We're looking at how the human interacts to come through. So we then start talking about remote access Trojans. Quite often we are seeing genuine tools being used, things like TeamViewer, as well as criminal remote access. But what we see on the mobile, and this is where it gets quite interesting now, we're seeing the actual racks are much more on Android. And we see the fact that we can see a change between how someone physically is using a device and how they're connecting in remotely. Physically, well, we've got the tips of our finger. We swipe, we tap, we know what's going on. But actually, when we've got a device emulator on there or a mobile rack where they're connecting in remotely into your mobile, we're going to find that there's going to be a different human behind it. But actually, we've got these little white dots. This is where they're using a mouse to click through, with a remote controlling it from a PC back onto a mobile they've taken out. And what we see with a heat map is that's where they most likely go through. So we start seeing the fact that there are anomalies as much as it doesn't match the profile. I think that's where behavior, in the way it should be used in fraud prevention, it's not about, well, is this Iain? It's actually about, does this look like a fraudster as we go through there? Just checking any of the Q&As and the rest of it, nothing there. So when we start looking at malware, going down a bit deeper, we know that malware can do one of 2 things. It can actually put remote access in there. What we also see is the fact that malware quite often can do things itself. It will run in the background. It can actually inject payments in. We can spot some of that because we can get the last 4 digits, which are, say, entered for a payee, and that can be passed back to the bank via an API to us. So we can do a checking and an integrity checking for kind of man in the mobile, man in the browser. But what we see behaviorally is, well, that payment may be going through, and we see genuine. We've seen that there's accelerometer, there's gyro data as to how it's been held, the speed of change that goes through. But actually, when we get to malware, we may find that where it's coming in timing, it may be in the middle of the night when you're asleep. But we're seeing that actually on that right-hand side, we're seeing that things are just, they're dead. They're not coming through. We've got none of the shaking. We've got none of the vibration. So on its own, it doesn't necessarily mean it. The genuine customer may have it down on the desktop, but we need to know the profile. We need to know what they normally would do, as well as knowing what bad guys do. And it's never one single thing. It's that layering of different pieces on top of there. The other thing, malware, coming back to the automation piece, what we've got is the fraud session at the top. We can actually show and give a representation of the flow through the application. So we go the log on screen, the home screen, the payment type, enter the payee, select the account it's coming from and go through. And on the top one, we're seeing that it's going back and forth. If you look, it's regular. They're going through quickly. The timings on that are very different. Is this programmatic? Is it automated? We can spot where there's no interaction on there. And we can do this for web as well as mobile. But genuinely, we're looking at the normal person where it's much longer timing. There's pauses. We've got the actual data entry. We've got the fact that we've got the XY and we've got all of the accelerometer and gyro data on there. So again, it's that layering. It's equally about what are the anomalies where they're standing out at a population level. And we learn from what goes on with the network of the banks that we're deployed in. Things like T-bot, flu-bot, we spotted these 99.5% accuracy with almost zero false positives, and literally stopped it in the banks who are using us on this. There's never one single thing. We've got not only the data science team who do the models, but we've got a threat analytics team who come from the banking sector who actually work around understanding what's going on with the bank and give the insights. It's not signature based. Behaviour can actually give you true 0 day. When we first seen the anomalies, we can then go back to the banks and talk to you and say what's going on. Moving on to really the last of the bits I wanted to cover, it's about the scams. These are becoming more of a problem. They have started in the Anglo-Saxon world. The English-speaking world, scams are a huge problem. We've got the UK payment figures there. The second half of 2021 were even worse. And what we've got there is the fact that the majority of the scams have originated in the mobile. Dirty little secret there. Most banks globally, pre-COVID, hadn't put the same level of security on mobile as they had on web. Fraud was on the web, not the mobile. Mobile, you couldn't make as many payments in effect. It was the fact that there was restrictions. COVID came in, payment limits went up to account for the fact people couldn't get into branch. You are letting customers who may not have used those channels come in. So as we've seen on there, the mobile app has now become the channel of fraud, particularly for scams. And this doesn't just include, say, voice scams, the impersonation ones we've got at the bottom, where someone rings you up. And this is where you as the customer are instructed to move your money to a safe account. They're pretending to be law enforcement. They're pretending to be a bank. They go through on this impersonation, and actually it is your genuine device, your genuine network. It's your genuine authentication, including biometrics. So it could include your face, your fingerprints to authenticate. It is your actual behavior because you're behaving in a consistent manner. But then there's subtle changes, which I'll come to, about how you then interact on there. We've talked about the rats. We're seeing those being used in scams. We're seeing that actually there's screen broadcasts coming in and similar. So the bad guys are no longer entering for the reasons I've just actually outlined, but they're looking to see what you're doing as a big brother over your shoulder to actually make sure that you're doing the right thing as they're telling you. It allows them to actually be more demanding and coercive on there. We've seen the change there in the payments. So we've actually got more lower value payments coming through. Some of that is PSD2, strong customer authentication. They can keep it below channel limits on there. They can play around with that. They also know that they can get around the transactional limits at your back-end risk systems. The other thing as well is we still see the fact that for some banks who may not have some of the control stacks in place, again, because of PSD2 SCA, that strong customer authentication, the bad guys are trying to get hold of those one-time passwords, particularly for things like using cards now in 3DS. We've done work on that where we can spot what's going on with the behavioural changes. Got to talk around the social engineering piece. This is the hardest one to go through, but I've got a query here. What happens when the attacker uses bot attacks to verify login credentials instead of manually testing them one by one? simple answer on that one there is the fact that when you're coming in with bots, we see timings, we see it's faster than a human. We may not see that there is keyboard or mouse activity coming in. We've got a whole load of stuff which spots the bots on there. We can do it in a cleverer way than some of the pure bot solutions, by the way. Coming back to the social engineering scams, we've talked about how we are having the genuine customers run up. So it's the genuine customer behavior, it's a genuine customer device, it's a genuine customer authenticator. So what do we start looking at? Well, we've got several hundred weak indicators on this, and this is actually live with around about 15 to 20 banks globally now, and it is really starting to push down. I'm not going to say it's a silver bullet, but the way that you can use behavior to actually counter these impersonations, these voice scams, we're finding that we can get somewhere between 50 and 70% of them at a false positive, which is low enough that banks can actually use that. We have the fact that in doing that, they then align it with their transactional information, because we don't get the personal identifiable information piece, and they're able to actually get to a level of scam detection which is acceptable. So what we've got here is on the scams, we'll see the fact that the user is typing and touching and swiping in the normal manner, but we'll see the accelerometer, we can see that. So if you're in a call, you'd be going like this. So we just see that actually we've got the Z-axis moving. So they're going around there listening. We can also see if it puts it down on the table and goes on speaker, but we can also see if they're on a call there. And we can see the amount of dead time in the session. So we start building up. None of these on their own is enough to actually detect it. We then look at the fact that, are they doodling? So we're looking for user distraction, user engagement, micro behaviors on there. So this is more on the web side, not so much on the mobile. So we don't get that same accelerometer. But what we get, if I'm actually speaking to you and it's actually on the phone, your keyboard on your laptop, and they're talking and they're going through a playbook, you start doodling, you start moving your finger on the trackpad, you start moving the mouse around. So we see some of that anyway, where people may legitimately be doing that. They try and make a payment and the wife's telling the husband where it is, and they don't have the details to hand. But actually what we get is there's all the positive pieces we can come through. When we can combine this with other pieces, we see the doodling and we see some data entry, or we see deletion, or we see hesitation. You know, we look back at a population level to see what's the time of the whole session there, what's the normal time of the user. But actually, if we've got these doodlings and we've got timings and the time to first entry of a field is high, what does that mean? And then we compare not to what the customer normally does again. And the last one I wanted to cover on this, and these are the more obvious pieces. I'm not giving away too much of our secret sauce there, but effectively, as I'm actually talking to you, you know, I'm the bad guy. Right, Iain, I need you to actually move the money. Now, I want you to enter to the account number. Okay, the account number is 12, and we see the user here, they left click, and they're waiting for 7 seconds. So it's 12. Then they type 12 in a box. Okay, so the next one I want you to do is 34. So you've got a gap, type 34. Okay, the last one is 56, gap 56. So we've got the fact that prior to entering this, you're doodling. The fact that we've got this typing cadence is slow. We have the fact that it's taking longer than expected. Then when you actually go to enter it and you get it wrong, you may then need to delete it, and you go back and you may just delete a single digit rather than deleting the whole thing and typing it in again if you're actually able to have it written down in front of you. So that's kind of how we can look for these advanced pieces. I think, you know, I'm now into the questions. I've got another question there, which I'll come on to. If anyone else has any questions, either drop them into the question field there, or reach out to me afterwards via LinkedIn or something. I'll just cover this. Behaviour can do so much more than the bits I've talked about, you know, classic accounts, takeover, voice scams, malware. We can actually use it now with different models for pure authentication, log on there, and that meets the PSD2 requirements. We've got the age analysis. We can pass discrete data points in there back to yourself. We've got a push API, so we can give a score at any point. So I think just looking at this, I've talked about the first question there about the bot attacks on there, where those are seen and we can spot human versus non-human speed. And we've got one about multi-factor, two-factor to verify the payment location. What we've seen is that when you get to the voice scams, any multi-factor or two-factor is in the control of the customer, and the bad guys telling the customer what to do. Payment location, well, you can get the geolocation, IP or true geo on there. What we see is whatever the banks have got in terms of multi-factor, which is normally mandated under things like PSD2 or equivalent, which is now rolling out worldwide. You know, it's going into the Middle East now. We've got equivalent down in the Asia Pac region there. We've got India where it's coming in as well. Even in America, it's coming in. Behaviour sits behind it. I think of Behaviour as a biometric style solution, which is multimodal in terms of not giving you a choice, but instead of actually having, well, here is my multi-factor, it's about how are you entering it? How are you doing it? Even when you're doing a push out to the mobile, which could be a multi-factor and is a very successful one, when you're looking at the mobile as to what's going on, you're thinking about how it's been entered, how you're typing, how you're holding, how you're swiping, and it can jump in there to actually aid what's going on. I hope that this has given you food for thought. I hope you found that this has been interesting. I'm a couple of minutes early on there, so I will pass back to the host to actually get their input. But thank you very much for listening. If you need any more, then please reach out to me.
Hey, thank you, Iain, for such a valuable insights and awesome presentation. So we'll be moving on to our next session.
News and history.